Welcome everyone. We are waiting 2 to 3 minutes before starting the webinar to accommodate for the rest of the attendees who are in the process of connecting. Welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us and thanks for being part of our community. Few reminders before starting. Know that today's webinar is 90-minute session, and during this time, please feel free to ask questions at any time by typing them in the live event Q&A window by clicking on the Ask a Question button. Be aware that any questions you post will be publicly visible. However, if you prefer, you can post your questions anonymously by checking the box right below where you enter it. We often get many questions on these webinars, and we will do our best to respond to all of them in real time. In the event, if the answer was not provided, or if you may have additional questions post the event, please don't hesitate to raise them on our Azure Sentinel forum at aka.ms/Azure Sentinel community. If you're listening to this after the fact as a recording, that's also a great place to ask questions. On a lengthy answers, we might provide them after the fact of the webinar in the same forum. We always love to hear your feedback on how we can improve these webinars. You can do so at aka.ms/security webinar feedback. Please note that this webinar is being recorded and will be shared publicly. We will post the recordings on our community at aka.ms/security webinars. While you're there, please join our community by visiting aka.ms/security community. That's the best way to ensure you don't miss any future webinars or major announcements. On our community, you can speak directly to our engineering teams that create our security products. You'll be able to influence our product designs and get early access to changes by doing things like participating in private previews, and you can sign up for this at aka.ms/security private preview. You can request features, give feedback, review our product roadmaps, attend in-person events, or join webinars like this. We believe that the best way to improve our products is by removing any barriers between you and the people that create them. So we hope you'll join us. We have a great topic to cover today. Ofer Shazaf is back with us again, who will take us through Azure Sentinel end-to-end SOC scenario. Ofer is a member of our Azure Sentinel team with deep product expertise. Without further ado, I'll turn it over to him. Ofer, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Valon. Welcome, everyone. Have a great day. As Valon mentioned, the topic today would be a SOC end-to-end use case. In previous webinars, we focused a lot on creating your SOC, collecting data, the architecture, the engineering side. And I felt that understanding how to actually use Sentinel in the day-to-day scenarios within the SOC is the next step and really an area I want to share with you. As Val mentioned, my name is Ofer Shazaf. I'm a principal product manager with the Azure Sentinel product team. In case you did not recognize my accent, I'm based out of Israel. And I joined Microsoft nearly exactly a year ago, a week more than that, to join Azure Sentinel. I come from SIEM background. I worked many years at HP ArcSight, and I'm very happy to be part of, well, the next gen SIEM. But enough marketing. Let's get into details. One more thing before getting into details. This webinar is part of a series. It used to be a short series. It's becoming long because we want to share with you every aspect of our product. We already delivered the 4 listed here, and today you are in the SOC Live webinar. We started with an overview, features and functionality. We moved on to cloud and on-prem architecture. How do you create your SOC using Azure Sentinel? Last week, we discussed incident response, and we already had a webinar earlier, actually late last year, on threat hunting using Azure Sentinel. In the coming months, we are going to add a lot more, and you have the full list here. I will not read all of it. It will be available as your material. I want to focus on a few. We'll talk about threat intelligence and Azure Sentinel. I hope it'll be in March. I'll do myself a deep dive into writing rules. I'll start that, give you a taste today as part of this webinar, but it's a very important topic, and there's so much to do with Sentinel, and I want to share that with you. We'll also have a Kobe from the product management team doing a webinar on automation using our SOAR capabilities later on. As you can see, that's just a tip of the iceberg. There are many others: threat hunting, deployment, getting started, etc. And if you don't go to RSA, we'll make sure that we update you on what happened at RSA. So into the waters. What I want to share with you today is how an analyst, not a SOC engineer, an analyst will actually use Sentinel, coming to work each morning. And I'll do that by going through the processes of an incident management workflow. I'll start. It's not directly what an analyst will do in the morning, but it's important for the full story, with creating a rule. It's a small example. As I mentioned, I'll have a full webinar about creating Sentinel rules later, but it's the start of the chain. We'll then talk about triaging an incident. A rule or building analytics will raise an incident, and the analyst will have to make a choice, make a decision, true or false. And we'll see how to do that in Sentinel. As usual, we have a lot of ways to do that. I'll present one, maybe two. I want to share with you the potential and capabilities. We'll then talk about investigation. Assume that the incident is of importance. You want to get to the root cause. You want to understand how to remediate. You want to understand how to prevent a recurrence. Once you investigated, you would like to respond, to do something to block, avoid the threat. And lastly, there's also a chance that this is a false positive for different reasons. So you want to make sure that Sentinel does not issue the same alert again. So we'll go through each one of those stages and we'll see how you really do that with Azure Sentinel. Let's start with creating a rule. We'll see how to use built-in analytics, how to write your own rule, and how to ensure that you integrate the service now. I should have capitalized that. I'll modify that before I send it to you. And I'll talk about why in a second. You'll notice that I avoided a demo today. I just went through it last night and did a lot of screenshots. The reason is that I prefer to that the deck that you'll receive will be useful and that will serve you on an ongoing basis as a guide. And I hope it works well. It certainly doesn't break as opposed to demos, though PowerPoint may break and it's still the Microsoft product. Here we go. The first thing, as I mentioned, is creating a rule. As I mentioned, with Azure Sentinel, you have out-of-box analytics. Some of them are black box machine learning models that you get as part of the product. Some of them are rules created by our research team that you can activate. So to do that, you'll go to the rule templates in the analytics tab in the product. You'll get a list. You can browse through it. You can search. I searched it for log, and I found the security event log cleared rule. It's a simple rule. I wanted to focus today on simple rules because it's just a small part of the webinar. We'll get into simple, elaborate, even complex rule in the future session. You got the one you liked. You have the right sources for it, which is very important, of course. And then you can just create it. We have more than 100, I didn't count lately, rules. We always update them. You can find them in the product. You can also find them in our GitHub, which is where we actually develop the content. So you can review all the rules before you ever touch the product. But maybe the rules that we have are not what you want. Maybe you want something else. Let's see how you can write your own alert rule in Azure Sentinel. To do that, you'll use the create scheduled query rule option and get into the wizard that enables you to create a rule. The first step in the wizard would be documentative in nature. You have to name the rule. This is important because it will be also the name of the incident when it's generated. You can add a description and you can decide on a default severity. We'll see later on that when you manage incidents, you change the severity based on the triage and investigation that you do. And you can also set the tactics, the MITRE attack framework tactics relevant to this rule. This enables you to complete the coverage of the MITRE attack framework, which is the de facto standard in analyzing the coverage of a SIEM and other products in relation to threat detection. This is just metadata. Of course, the main thing you want to do is you want to define the rule. You want to define the actual logic used to determine whether there was an alert worth raising. You do that using KQL. KQL, Kusto Query Language, is a SQL-like, it's a bit more targeted towards event processing query language, which is behind everything in Sentinel. One of the nice things about Sentinel is that everything is done using the same query language, the same queries, whether it's workbooks, which are dashboards, whether that's hunting or search or alert rules. So you'll run your query. You can use IntelliSense to create a query. You can see here that the system offers me auto completion of the text I entered. And as you can see, now you have a full rule. Actually, the only thing you really need for a rule is the first line, security event, pipeline where event ID equals 1102. Actually, that's exactly the built-in rule I presented earlier. It's a simple use case. It's one of the examples where a very simple logic, essentially just creating an alert on a single source event, may be valuable. As I mentioned, there are way more elaborated uh, ways to write alert rules. However, I did want to share with you an easy one. I'll give you another clear use case for such rules. If you want to elevate an event that comes from a system which is by itself an alert, for example, an antivirus reported a virus, it will come as an event to Sentinel and you want to make an alert on it, either with no filtering or with minimal filtering. So a rule is just a rule, just a simple filter. It can get deeper, but that's another session. Stay tuned. The one thing that you can see here, the second line is important. In order to enable you to investigate using our sophisticated tool for investigation, it's advisable to set entities, to define what are the common entities in the alert that will be generated. You can see that you do it here at the bottom in the entity pane. You can today assign 4 important entities: account, host, IP, and URL. In practice, as you can see at the top, it updates the query. So even that is, while there's a UI for that, and you select the entity mapping in the UI, actually updates the query and is implemented using the query language. So what we have here, we have we'll generate an incident if somebody cleared the event log on any monitored server or endpoint, Windows of course, that's a Windows event, and we'll map to the account entity. The account in this case is pretty direct, and as you can see here, I was just going to add also the computer entity as the host, which I did complete when I took the screenshot. Next, we'll want to do we want to set the scheduling to the rule. A rule query can include timing information and time filtering. Importantly, when you write a rule in Sentinel, it doesn't look just at a single event coming now, as the example you saw just now may suggest. It has a look back. It can view the history. You can compare this event to any event queried from the database in the past. But here I want to focus on simple, I don't want to bother with timing, I just want to alert when something happens. For that matter, what I'll do is I'll set a simple schedule. I set a query frequency. I selected 5 minutes in this instance, and I also will select a lookup window, how far back to look into the data. For simple rules such as this one, those should match, should be the same. When they are not the same, when there is a windowing effect, you want to look at events coming in the last 5 minutes, but compare them with events coming over the last day. There is some windowing consideration to take into account in the query itself, which we'll discuss when we discuss rule writing. Lastly, you define a threshold. Uh, Personally, I find that actually, I think in all our rules, I need to check, we always include the threshold as part of the query. So the query can do count and can compare to a threshold, and we often assume that greater than 0 is an alert using the query itself rather than doing only if there are 5 results use a threshold. So we most often use greater than 0 as the default. So a simple rule would be a filter, taking the security event table, Windows events, filtering it for a specific condition, and then running that every few minutes and alerting. You can look into the built-in rules, the GitHub, or wait for my upcoming webinar on rules to understand how a lot for us for the rest of this one. For each rule, you can also define an automation, a playbook that would be run automatically when the playbook, when the alert triggers. I selected one here, as I mentioned, which is just open a snow ticket. I'll show you later, in this case, how to manually run as part of the investigation playbooks to enrich the information, to respond. But now, automatically, I want to do one thing. We find my experience in the SIEM world for many years is that customers tend to use a ticketing system on top of the SIEM in order to manage incidents. So before we get to triage, to investigate, which requires the data is often within the SIEM, we have to make sure that we open the ticket also in ServiceNow, in this case, or Jira, as the previous playbook shows here, so that the ticketing system is also up to date. Naturally, there's also a way to close those once you resolve or update the incident later on. So, as I mentioned, actually creating a rule it happened often, but it's not part of the incident management process. Incident management process starts when you want to triage an incident that was triggered, that was alerted on. What we'll do now is we'll understand the incident page. We'll see the incident queue at Sentinel, the incident page, how you start looking at it, start triaging. We'll look how you can collect additional data using a playbook, which I think is a neat feature. So doing enrichment on the current incident because downlist determines it needs more. We'll use the investigation graph, a very, very innovative feature that we have in Sentinel. It's a whole world by itself. The webinar last week about incident response, which I mentioned, include a very detailed demo of the investigation graph. I did not want to focus on it today, but I did not want to hide it, so I added a small section on it. Interesting enough, it's not the best fit for the specific scenario I selected, so I selected a different scenario to show for the investigation graph. And lastly, we'll show how to manage the incident. Once we made a determination, we understood how we go forward and update status and owner. So this is Sentinel's incident queue. When an alert triggers, it automatically generates an incident. Today, in 99 point something percent, an alert will translate to a single incident. I'll share with you that we are going to introduce a feature that will allow aggregating multiple alerts into a single incident very shortly. You're all welcome to join the private preview, but you'll have to sign an NDA for that. But for now, each alert that triggered by a rule would become an incident, as you can see here. Let's look at one that looks potentially interesting. Activity from infrequent country. Now, this is an example of actually an alert that was not generated by a rule. It came from Microsoft Cloud App Security, so another product. Keep in mind that one of the important use cases for a SIEM is not just to be a detection engine and detect using rules or built-in analytics, but also to manage alerts coming from additional sources, whether Microsoft sources, and we collect alerts from all of Microsoft security products, or from third-party sources. I mentioned antivirus before, intrusion detection systems, etc. Or EDR, which is on Microsoft, is also viable. Now that we found that we want this one as an important one, we want to get into the details, so we'll go into full details. This will be the full details screen for the incident. You can see the incident description, which came from Microsoft Cloud App Security. If you look into the details, you'll see that we have a user. Keep the name in mind because we'll get back to it a lot, Alex Wilbur, who performed a failed sign-in activity. So it's failed. Being a failed sign-in activity means that no known harm so far, but we may want to look into that. The activity was performed from Sweden, which we know the user did not get from for the last 137 days. I suspect he was never there. We'll discuss Alex later on, and I'll explain who he is. But for now, 4 and some months. We also have artifacts. We also have information about the incident. You see on the left side the related alerts. We see the entities that we mapped. We also see them on the right side, the actual entities. And if it was an alert or incident that was generated by a rule or built-in machine learning, you'll see the events. This one is an external alert that we created an incident on, and therefore there are no events. It's an important distinction, keep that in mind. You'll see here NA for events if it's an alert that was received from, in this case, Microsoft Cloud App Security. So we have the information in the alert. For this example, I showed you just the entities. That's what's most important here. Alex W tried to log in from a known specific IP address. We'll look into this IP address in a second. You have more information if you drill down to the alert itself by clicking alerts either here or either the top bar or at the icon on the left side. For example, you'll see the type of sign-in, the application that the user tried to sign into, which is also very important. Now, as I mentioned, that's the alerts list. One question that analyst may ask himself is this IP a good or bad one? I mean, should I be worried or not? I'll share with you that what I'll show you now is just one way to do it, which might fit in some use cases. Jason Westcott will share with you in his webinar about threat intelligence, how you can enrich beforehand the information about IP with Sentinel using Microsoft Threat Intelligence. But I want to show you another method, which is very common. We want to collect more information, for example, maybe from internal systems. And we'll select a playbook to run. The playbook I'll run, most of the playbooks you see here, by the way, are available. We build them for you. They are available in our GitHub, and you can use them as is and import them to the Sentinel workspace. So this one is get IP reputation, specifically from VirusTotal. I did run it, and I'll show you the results later on, but let's first look at what the playbook does. This is a Sentinel playbook. It's actually based on a technology within Azure called Logic Apps, a very sophisticated automation engine. I mentioned we'll have a session about automation as well. What it does here, and I didn't have the start. It starts with collecting the incident data. So get the IPs, as you can see at the top here. You can see at the top that it gets the IPs. And then for each IP address, there might be a few IP addresses associated with an alert, though we had just one in this one. It will use the HTTP connector which is configured to call a VirusTotal and get results. It's a RESTful API connector that can be used with any REST service. Logic Apps has a very large number of connectors. You can collect data from Azure Active Directory, from many different systems. I mentioned before that you can also connect to ServiceNow to read an incident or create an incident. Then we have a condition, so the playbook can have conditions in it. If there was any result, if IP was found, we'll store the results, we'll write them into the Sentinel workspace. So the data actually found will be available. And we'll also create a comment in the incident body specifying whether data was found or not. So the analyst, when viewing the incident, actually sees what was the result and can decide if they want to go and look into the actual data of the results. The way it looks within Sentinel. I'm back to the incident page. You see that now we looked into the entities tab, we looked into the alerts tab, now into the comments tab. Any user can type in comments to say what they found about the ticket, the incident, etc. In this case, the playbook, the automation, added a comment. In this case, VTI report was not found for. So VirusTotal did not report any information on this IP address. Good chance it's not a malicious one, so we need to look for a different reason. We'll probably lower the severity. Your playbook might be different, your processes, and then maybe assign to a hunter. It was blocked. It's not from malicious IP. It's not some bot going after us. We need to, as an ongoing process later on, investigate. Let's call it hunting. Okay, let's look for root cause for something which is generally not okay, and we'll see how to do that in a second. I mentioned the graph investigation. When using the system and looking for the best examples, it did not fit well the geolocation alert that I just presented to you. I did want to show you the capability. I urge you to go and play with it. It's surprisingly it does way more than look when you get the first alert and then you start to expand. It really shows you things you did not know. That's the point. Here I sort of open it up because it's slides. So let's go through it. We had you see here that I have two views opened, both the graph view, which is good to find relationships, and we also have apologies for a second. And we also have the timeline view on the right, which is many times more convenient to understand the story. So I started with the timeline view and I point you on the graph where you can see it. So this user account, okay, PC admin, was created and deleted. So there's something fishy about it. We need to try to look into what's happening. And then we see that we got an impossible travel alert on the same user. And once we have that, we also have a lot of information because impossible travel includes at least 2 IP addresses and applications accessed. So we can determine whether it makes sense, different applications, same application, etc. And we also understand that through the third alert that the actual sign-in that failed was not typical. Probably the user it's not to the application that user is usually connecting. So it's not just geography, it's also the wrong application. Okay. This might be, this works if we didn't have the data for AlexW to that depth, a good way to go forward and check whether the AlexW sign-in was good or bad. In this case, it's PC admin I got the information for. I do urge you to go and experience that. Also, if you don't have a system running, Raz's webinar from last week, which I listed in the webinar slides, include a very detailed example of using this feature in order to try to investigate. So we made an initial decision. We decided that the alert we got is not immediately critical, but it might be worth looking into on an ongoing basis. So I label it hunting, hunch-based hunting. We want to look into it. It might be, tomorrow, on the scheduled time for such hunting or investigations. Let's look at how we'll do that. We'll use a workbook, a very interesting alternative for investigation, which is not about the graph or about search. We will drill down into raw events to look how you do it actually in search, when you want full flexibility, less guidance. And we'll see how once we found something and we want to document it, we can use a feature called bookmark in order to remember the data that we found in the raw events and attach it to the incident. Let's start. This is a workbook. This is a workbook you have in the system. It's about AD sign-ins, so it's a way to analyze sign-ins. Since the alert we got about Alex W was about sign-ins, it's a good place to go to and check, in general, what Alex W did recently. Workbooks are not just dashboards; they're interactive applications, and they're built in with features. In this case, you can actually filter by users, and I'll filter by Alex Wilbur. So instead of thousands of sign-ins, most of them successful, if I filter by Alex Wilbur, I'll see that, well, he always fails, or at least in the last 14 days. The numbers are not huge, but they're pretty large. And also, it's from anywhere. I mean, just across the world. So I have my guesses. My first guess would be that it's a breach account. Somebody assumes they have the credentials for Alex Wilbur, but they obviously don't have the right ones because they fail. But maybe they're trying. Maybe it's a type of a brute force attack in which they try from all over. But to actually look into that, we may want to go into a map view of the activity. So let's look into another workbook we have, which is a user travel map. So we'll take a user and we'll see where was he around the world. And the way we build it, the first user it starts with is yourself, which is always a bit challenging. That's me in this case. And the one thing we already learned in this webinar is that I travel too much. But let's focus on Alex Wilbur. If you look at Alex Wilbur, we'll see that don't travel anymore. I mean, it can't be a freaking fire. It's just all over the world. On the other hand, you'll notice that it's not from your typical suspects. So when you have an attack where there is a breached identity or a botnet trying to penetrate through a user, the location of the sources would be a lot more distributed. It would be everywhere because bots exist everywhere. If you try to analyze what this one is about, it's a very good depiction of GDP concentration around the world. It's where there's business. So it points out to, in this case, I can show you probably Microsoft offices, areas where Microsoft is more active, and not really an attack attempt. So this specific visualization was very strong in showing me that it's not a botnet. It's more, for one reason or another, a lot of suit dressed people or techies trying the wrong password for one reason or another, which is probably a good reason to turn the alarm off and decide that we are fine. I'll share with you the story. I mean, I knew in advance that would be the case. Alex W, we had Sentinel is a new product and we were very fast on the market. When we started, we wanted everybody to be able to demo Sentinel. We created a user in the demo tenant called Alex W, and every Microsoft employee was able to demo using a read-only user called Alex W. When Microsoft is not a small place, and that naturally enabled a lot of people to demo, but it means also that the password leaked. Probably partners, people that really had the need. It was read-only, it's a demo tenant, but the thing we did was we blocked it, and Microsoft introduced a very intriguing technology called Lighthouse, which enabled us to provide access to this demo tenant to customer employees, actually also to partner employees in the future, based on trust between the tenants, essentially. So we don't need that anymore. However, the password is still there, and mostly people that don't know about the change, found the password somewhere in all documentation, are trying that. Probably not an attack, but we need to find that, and Sentinel provides just the way to do it in a very, very visual manner. All that said, the next thing I did was actually, okay, so we have all those signing failures. I understand them. I know them. Let's see what Alex W did in addition. What else did he do? And what you do for that is very easy. Many people miss that in Sentinel and log analytics, which is the underlying log management technology we use, and they think that you need elaborate queries. You can do search. So I did search Alex W to find all the events around in which Alex W appears. And I found that there are many signing logs. By the way, you can't see it here, but the signing logs are the failures we've seen before. The audit logs events, I didn't expand any of those, but if you go, are actually password resets. And I tried to figure out why there are those password resets. Is it more malicious than I thought? And then actually when simulating a failure, I found that once you fail, you get an option to password reset. And my guess is that users, the first thing they do before they, send me an email asking what's the new way to get to the demo, they'll press the password reset. But we did also find MCAS activity, MCAS discovery activity. So MCAS, Microsoft Cloud App Security, is observing the user Alex W trying to access SaaS applications. Some of them Microsoft, some of them external. Actually, it's something that we're still looking into. Since the user is blocked, we'll see that in a minute. I don't assume there is an issue there. We still need to understand why. Maybe the leakage is harder than we thought. That said, what I want to show you here is that now that I want someone else to take over what I did last night and continue with that, I want to mark this finding. I want to make sure that this MCAS discovery data is available to the guy investigating further. For that, we use something called bookmarks. I did use a somewhat more direct query here, as you can see above, to get to the same piece of information. The reason is that when you do search Alex W, you get information from very different tables, and while you can bookmark it, you currently cannot assign entities to that. And as you can see here, this is a Yammer use attempt record, and I'll mark the V on the left side of the event. I'll use add bookmark, and then I get the add bookmark on the right, and I can add meta information for the user coming after me. I'll name the bookmark, Alex W. Yammer use. I'll provide entities. We already mentioned that entities are important. They're actually the basis for our graph investigation, which I presented briefly before. And actually, you can also investigate the bookmark using graph investigation. So entities are important. And we have selected a few entities here, saved it, and then we have a bookmark. Then you go to the bookmark and you can edit to an incident. And I selected the same incident that we had before, 5941, activities from a different country, and I'm attaching the bookmark to it. And then in the entity, in the incident page, we already saw the artifacts in the alerts, entities, and comments tabs. Now you can see that there's also a bookmark here. Bookmark is our way to enable you to bring findings from your investigation in the search window as artifacts into incidents. I'll go a slide back and I'll show you something important here. I used add to an existing incident in the menu above, but I could also create a new incident. What I demonstrated today was pseudo hunting. It was hunting that started from some anomaly observed in the alert data, and therefore I had an incident created and attached to it. In real hunting, in free-form hunting, you'll start from observing the data with no incident created. You still would want to manage that using incidents. And the way to do it was you found interesting information, it has importance, you want to create an incident out of that, you'll create a bookmark and you'll create a new incident based on the bookmark, as you can do here above. So summing up what we did so far, leaving aside the rule definition part, we triaged an incident, determined that it didn't look, the user was only failing, uh, and decided that it's longer term analysis. We moved to investigation. We investigated mostly using workbooks and saw that he's spread around and usually logs in from major Microsoft sources, uh, and determined based on that it's a non-issue. We did go further to look if there's additional alerts and events on the user, and we did find additional information that's probably worth keeping this open and checking further. I didn't do it for now. However, that's not failsafe. That's not the end of the game. We need to do something about it for sure. So the next step would be respond. What you'll see here are a few things. First, a very nice feature we have about live streams, streams, I'll fix that typo, sorry for that. It enables to ongoingly monitor the user if, you know, the incident is an ongoing one and the response is continuous. We'll use a playbook to actually block the user, the most obvious one. And we'll also look into an example of how to handle a false positive. Alex W is, well, not interesting. You don't want any more alert from him. We want to do something about that. Let's start. So the first one would be Livestream. Livestream is a neat feature that enables you to write a query, same query language that we've seen in the alert rules, same query language that's behind the map in the workbooks. I didn't show that, but it's the same query language, same query language here. You write a query and the screen below it just updates in real time to show you what's going on. So you have this Alex Wilbur, you want to keep monitoring to see what's going on, to see that things are not getting worse. If it's, if the risk is probably higher than we found in this case, you'll use Livestream. You can open it in a different window and keep watching what's going on with Alex Wilbur. The query can be more elaborate and more detailed and more whatever you want. Probably the most obvious thing you want to do would be to block the user. In this case, he's already blocked naturally, but I think that the knee-jerk reaction in this case would be to block the AD user. I would not do it automatically in the playbook you run automatically on the rule, though that's also possible. But it's probably one of the first things the analyst will do after initial triaging. We have it built in for you, blocking the AD user. It means that whatever further research we do in order to understand and learn, the threat is not there. Lastly, we would like to create a mechanism to ensure that our alert does not happen again, because it's a waste of time to the SOC team. I want to show you a neat feature around that. Because we looked into the clear log rule when defining a rule, I went back to this one, but it would apply to most other rules. What we want to do is essentially a whitelist. We want to define a whitelist. So we just released, my colleague Nir Gafni just released a blog post that shows you how to use a lookup table in an external file in order to do whitelisting. Essentially, we'll add a line to the query language that we have. Let me go one back so you can see everything. You'll identify the second line, security event, where event ID equals 1102. That's exactly as we had before. And then a small addition, and user principal name not in whitelist. So whitelisting is as easy as that. Of course, the one thing you need to make sure is that there is something called whitelist and that it's up to date. The way to do it, there are a few ways to do it in Sentinel. One of the neat ones, probably my favorite one, was to use something called external data, which is a query operator that can look into external files coming, for example, from Azure Storage. In this case, we did use Azure Storage. So whitelist would get a table from Azure Storage using a URL that you can retrieve. You can get it when you store a file on Azure Storage and put it in the query. And the file looks something like that. It's just a CSV. And you see that the seventh one is AlexW, which means once we did this, no more AlexW. Additionally, as you can see, the file does not have just a list of usernames, it has more than that. It has a risk score, it has a location, and if you go to the blog post that Peter did on that, you'll see how we do way more than just a whitelisting and utilize the rest of the information to actually write smarter detection rules. You'll find the blog post in the tech community, which Valon pointed to before, and also we'll point to again at the end of the webinar. So on the resources slide, I'll summarize. We in this webinar today, I tried to move from the two common topic of building a SIEM, and I've been doing SIEM for quite many years, and I see too many organizations hung on collecting data without really building security operations. And I hope that with Azure Sentinel, we bring you the right tool to move forward and actually do security operations. And in this, I think with this webinar, we are starting to show you how to do that, focusing on the analyst activity rather than the engineer or rule writer activity. Still, I started with sharing a bit of rule writing. Rule writing is always a shared responsibility between analysts and engineers. And then we moved into how to triage an incident, looking into the incident screen, the investigation graph, and actually how to run playbooks to actually enrich the data when doing the triaging. Triaging, in this case, proved that the threat is low, but that the issue is worth further consideration. So we looked into further investigation. We used, in this case, workbooks. Sign-ins are many times easily analyzable by workbooks, both the general sign-in workbook as well as sign-in mapping, and decided we understood the story. Based on that, we wanted to continue and figure out what to do further. And the response was running another playbook to actually block the user, which probably should have been done before, but it was in the presentation framework, it was in the end. And then very interestingly, fix a rule in order to avoid further alerts. Now, an important thing about fixing the rule, of course, I showed you the rule, but a good strategy would be to always have a whitelisted rule so that you don't have to update the rule. You only update the file at the end, so anyone with access to the file can add a whitelisted user. I hope that was useful. One of the greatest things about Sentinel in general, and in particular in Microsoft in general these days, we're very open. You can find a lot of information, whether it's our documentation, our tech community, the blogs I mentioned, or our GitHub, which is where our content, our workbooks and our playbooks and our detection queries and handling queries are all stored before they get to the product. So you can look into them, suggest additional, contribute additional things. If you want to reach out back, ask questions. If you didn't get the right question today yet, or at the end of the webinar, I urge you to use the tech community and ask whatever you want. It's an easier place to answer long and detailed answers. And we'd also love to hear your feature request on user voice. And if nothing works, we have our email address, which will reach essentially the people on this, the experts behind answering you online, so we can handle things that require an email. So thank you all. If you didn't use Sentinel so far, it's very easy to start. I still remember somebody asking me, where do I download it from? You don't download it from. It's cloud. It's a SaaS service. Uh, Start an Azure trial subscription, create an Azure Sentinel workspace, and connect data sources. If you do it for one of our free sources, it's even costless. So just experimenting doesn't cost any money. Uh, I hope you'll enjoy it, and we love to hear about it. Thank you all, and back to you, Valon.
Thank you, Ofer. By the way, all the slides that Ofer shared with the hot links, will be sharing that with you as usual at aka.ms/security webinars. This is a one-stop shop a site where you're able to find what's upcoming, and you can register, as well as the previous recordings such as this one today. So let's just go over through some unanswered questions here and see, Ofer, if you can help us with that. So one of them is, hello, I understand for SQL request through Workspace, but not really what I need. In that case, when a client has 3 tenants with Sentinel installed on each, is it possible to get the data from those Sentinel in only one Sentinel interface?
It's a big question that will require a whole webinar for itself. Luckily, we already did it. I think instead of answering a very short and partial answer, which will just raise more questions, I'll refer you to the architecture webinar that I personally did and is available also on the aka.ms/security webinars link, and should answer many of your questions, if not all. And I appreciate there might be additional questions. We are happy to answer on the tech community any further questions.
Okay, thank you for that. Next one is, I can see that you provide the ability to connect Azure ATP to Sentinel. Can this also be done with Microsoft Advanced Threat Analytics? I'm assuming this would be done by configuring CEF.
Yes. So for those who didn't, it took me some time to understand. Microsoft Advanced Threat Analytics, for those into acronyms, is ATA, which is an earlier solution that is mostly superseded by Azure ATP. And yes, the way to collect events from ATA, which is an on-prem solution, would be to use Ceph, or one of our capabilities for collecting on-prem events.
Okay, thank you for that.
I'll mention, again, this webinar was very much not about collecting data. Other webinars, including one I mentioned earlier on, have a lot more information about collecting data, though admittedly I didn't mention there at that webinar ATA, so I had to answer today.
Next one, do you see Sentinel ever being useful in the SMB space?
It's a very good question. I think that it's not before it is a Sentinel question, it's a SIEM question, and it's a SOC question. The presentation I did today, as the title suggests, is intended to demonstrate the use for an analyst in a SOC. An analyst in a SOC implies a level of investment which smaller organizations would never have. It implies, at least half an FT doing that. So, let's take a full employee for that matter. If security incidents are handled as a part-time job by an IT guy, the process that I presented today may not be ideal. It doesn't mean the Sentinel cannot do it. It doesn't mean that what I present today may not be the best solution. For example, it's very common that you want to do email alerting. You want to get things by email because you'll not go to the console ever, which is doable using the playbooks I presented. That said, wearing my SIEM expert hat rather than the Microsoft person hat, I would recommend every SMB to look first into service providers rather than trying to do that themselves. I think it's a good solution. And what Sentinel does very well is address the managed service providers use case because it changes the uh, paradigm of service provisioning. Traditionally, if you got a service as an SMB from a service provider, with the system you saw nothing. In the Sentinel world, Sentinel belongs to you as a customer. It's just served by the service provider. So you have something new. You have a system you still have access to, but you got someone hosted on your tenant to manage it for you. And that means that you sort of win from both ends, which I think is nice.
Thank you for that. Next one is, and I see quite some folks leaving, although this is a 90-minute session, as I mentioned at the beginning, but we'll continue on for a little bit more on those unanswered questions. So the next one offer is, how could I add a playbook to automatically remediate all alerts with the name activity from infrequent, and this is quoted from MCAS.
How can I add a playbook to automatically validate?
Remediate.
Remediate. Okay. So you can, though we have a gap, which I skipped over today. When you define your scheduled alert rule, you can define, as I presented today, an automated playbook to respond. We have a feature that enables a shorter version, an immediate version, that will elevate alerts from MCAS or other Microsoft products into incidents. And this shorter, lightweight rule does not support running playbooks as of today. Of course, it's a feature we are working on. I hope to have it shortly. Meanwhile, if that's important, it may be important, you can still run a standard alert rules on alerts coming from MCAS, for example. It's more work to create those rules. You don't get the shortcut version, but they do offer running a playbook.
Thank you for that. A short one here, short question. Any plan to build a proxy for upload data with some VPN?
Sorry, any plan to build what with a VPN?
To build a proxy for upload data with some VPN. That's the question.
Yeah, I need to say I'm not sure I understood. I can take it in a few ways. One of them would be I have my data on-prem, event data, and I need a more secure way to upload it to the cloud. I would suggest that we have the ways to do that at Microsoft today, whether it's the agent and agent proxy, which is a proxy, or express route, but it requires more details to understand the specific, whoever asked that, specific circumstances to understand what's missing and how we can resolve that. That's one. If the question is about getting VPN or proxy data in, I think that we do a lot of that today. And again, if there's a specific missing device that we need to support, we want to hear about it. User voice, email, we will look into it.
Okay, we'll raise those two more questions that just came in, and the next one is from Tom. The inline JavaScript plugin in Logic Apps didn't work on my tenant. I didn't find playbooks on GitHub using JavaScript. Do you know if it's functional?
Unfortunately not. One of the advantages and challenges of being part of the Azure platform is that we enjoy a lot of technology which we don't directly develop, and Logic App Connectors is a very good example of that. I'm always excited when I hear about a new thing I didn't have to work about, but when there is a problem, then I may not know the answer. That said, we are working closely with the team, and again, take a minute, your email will connect you with the right pairs of Logic App teams to look into that.
Okay, and the last one here is from Prasanna. We see the Defender API or Graph API does not give some data attributes as compared to Sentinel's direct connectors for onboarding logs. Is there an API for Sentinel connector I can use to onboard logs using a custom logic app instead of Sentinel connector?
Yes. Okay. So um, there is we have an API that you can use in order to drive data directly to Sentinel and to log analytics, which will probably address the requirement here. There are also easier way to use that API without directly programming. I think you mentioned Logic Apps. That's an easy one. I want to warn to have a short warning on Logic Apps. Logic Apps may be costly if used to drive a large amount of data. So if you want to send a low rate of events, say alerts, if you have 10,000 a day, that's way too many alerts. It's not costly to do using Logic App. If you want to send 10,000 events per second using Logic Apps, the cost of Logic App, which is per operation, will be prohibitive. So an alternative is needed. Other options to use the API without programming would be PowerShell, for example, which is a nice one, or a Logstash, which is it's VM based, so but it's still an easy way to use the API. Both of them would be cheaper. An interesting combination is PowerShell, the PowerShell module, in combination with Azure Functions, offering yet another alternative. All that is very, very brief for for a large topic. To get more information on that, we have a blog post on custom connectors for Sentinel, which includes all the information and examples on how to do that.
Thank you, Ofer. I couldn't resist not questioning this one that just came in, so this will be the last one. Any plans to build a connector for Google Cloud, much in the same way as the AWS connector?
So yes, we have plans. I'll say two things about it. First of all, as a public webinar, are a bit limited as in providing timelines, etc. We would love, what we find out is people ask the general question. They know they need this connectivity, but then there is the question of what really they need, the details. And to create a product, when we create this, we need the details. For example, we have on our plate additional features to the AWS connector because we did what we think was right, and now we get feature requests for other stuff. So we would really like to hear you. We more often than not, maybe because a lot of our customer base is Microsoft focused, hear the general request for GCP, but not the particulars. And your help in helping us in doing that would be great.
Thank you. So just a few reminders before ending the call. The next Azure Sentinel webinar is a week from today on Wednesday, January 29. The topic is about threat hunting, and it's a 60-minute session. For details, as I have previously posted here, please go to aka.ms/security-webinars. And in case we missed to answer your question, or if you have additional questions, you can visit us on our Azure Sentinel forum at aka.ms/Azure Sentinel community. And if you're listening to this after the fact as a recording, that's also a great place to ask a question. I want to thank all of those who helped answering the questions. Thank you, Ofer, for another fantastic presentation. Most of all, I want to thank all of you for being part of our community and for joining us on these webinars. We hope to see you next time. Goodbye.